Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Christy Nuds. I am the editor of Food in Canada, Canada's only national food and beverage processing magazine. On behalf of Food in Canada and the Canadian Institute of Food Science and Technology, welcome to Table Talks, where we bring you regular webinars that give you access to some of the leaders in the food and beverage industry. If you haven't already, please visit CIFST's website for a list of our upcoming webinars, which will continue weekly into June. If you are a member of CIFST, registration for the entire webinar series is free. Today's topic is the power of the pivot. I am sure this topic will resonate with everyone. Before we kick off today's session, I want to mention that if you have any questions, you can write them in the question box. I will be moderating any of the questions at the end, and our speakers will attempt to answer them before the end of the webinar. And now I would like to introduce our two speakers today. Cher Mereweather is one of Canada's leaders in food manufacturing sustainability. As president and CEO of Provision Coalition, Cher works directly with manufacturers to increase revenue, reduce costs, and elevate their brands purposefully. An advocate for change and a passionate spokesperson, Cher has dedicated her career to working with Canadian food processors and manufacturers to ensure this growth is both profitable and sustainable. Jon Duschinsky is an entrepreneur, social innovator, thought leader, speaker, and coach who helps unleash the power of purpose in business. He has worked with global business and political leaders in over 60 countries, is the author of 2 books, and is driven by his purpose of helping leaders make more money by doing more good. Jon challenges the status quo, sparks disruptive change, and reframes the well-worn story of profits over people. Please welcome Cher and Jon.
Thank you, Christy. For those of you who are not familiar with Provision Coalition Incorporated, our purpose is making food sustainably, and we are a team of food industry sustainability experts. And when we think about what's happening right now in the food industry and the disruptions that we're seeing and the challenges that we're having to face, boy, this is really an important topic. Our goal for you today is really to help you think differently about your business today so that you are well positioned for tomorrow. Over to you, Jon.
Hi, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. So today we're going to be talking about this notion of resiliency, and we thought we'd start with just a simple definition. What do we mean by resiliency? Well, resiliency is this ability to withstand and recover quickly from difficult conditions. And as Cher said, we're in the pretty difficult conditions now, probably the most difficult conditions any of us have ever seen in our lifetimes. And today we're going to be taking you on a journey through what resiliency looks like. And we've got 5 phases in this journey today, folks, 5 phases. The first one, we're going to look at the initial step of business continuity. So the panic, the crisis, a phase that we've been through, that arguably we may be emerging from. We like to call the phase that we're in right now the end of the beginning. So business continuity is the first step, making sure that you can keep things running. Second, Phase 2, the power of the pivot, the title of our subject of our session today, because it is a really powerful and really important question. Where are we pivoting to? Once we've got the business under control, where are we pivoting to? Where are we going? Phase 3, we want to look at operational efficiencies so that we can build powerful efficiencies that are going to help us reduce costs and help us be more sustainable as we move through this process. Phase 4, understanding what's really at stake here. The journey we're going to be on over the next few months and years is not going to be a pretty one. There's going to be a lot of people left standing by the side of the road. So in order to keep fighting and get up every day and push through this, you've really got to understand what's at stake. And the 5th phase we'll look today in this journey of resiliency is what we call writing the future in circles. Cher.
So there was this incredible article that actually landed in my inbox a few weeks ago that was written by the Harvard Business Review in 2010. And what they looked at was how firms recovered after the various recessions, the most recent being the 2008 recession. And what was really interesting about the results is that 17% of the firms that they investigated never made it out of the recession. So they went bankrupt. Pretty staggering results. 74% of those firms did survive. That's the good news. But in order to survive, they had to do massive cuts and they had to really change the way that they focused on their business, and it took them almost 3 years to recover and get back to pre-recession revenue levels. But there was 9% that thrived. They actually came out of the recession stronger and better than before the recession hit. And so we wanted to, of course, investigate and explore, well, what was it about those 9% that really allowed them to thrive? And what we found was that 9% actually focused in on their people. They didn't cut jobs. They maintained their knowledge. They maintained their currency, if you will, from their people. They focused on their pivot into new markets, and they focused and invested in R&D. And we would add that they likely had a strong purpose guiding them throughout that. So what we're going to do now is we're going to touch on those frontiers, as John alluded to, and demonstrate how we can focus our business today so that we can ensure we're that 9%. So the first phase is all around the business continuity. This is about understanding the 7 urgent questions that you need to be asking yourself. And I'm going to suggest that most of these questions you've likely already dealt with, but there might be little nuggets here and there that you haven't considered. So we're going to go through those urgent questions as though you're hearing them for the first time. Question 1, how are you taking care of your people? The goal here is really to create a space for open dialogue with your teams. So this is all about looking at your communications. How effective are your communications? Are you making sure that you are communicating up and down your organization across all lines, making sure that every individual in the organization understands what's happening to the business and what is critical to the business? And how are you using things like change management to support you in your communication efforts? When we look at the principles of change management, there's building awareness, building desire, making sure that you have the knowledge and the ability within your team, and then reinforcing. So if we look at change management within the lens of COVID, do your employees, are they aware of how critical their role is? Are they aware of how important it is that they show up? And do they have the desire to show up? Does your team have the knowledge to do multiple roles within the organization should there be a gap somewhere else? Do they have the ability to do multiple jobs? Do you have that strong cross-training? And are you reinforcing the new processes and procedures that you're putting in place? And are you reinforcing the importance of all of that? And then sort of digging a little deeper into some of the support that you're offering your employees. When we think about how you're taking care of them, are you making sure that they have all the necessary protective equipment? Are you making sure that they are spaced apart on the line? Do they have the necessary spaces in the break rooms and in the change rooms? Do they have an opportunity to be apart and make sure that they stay safe while also making sure that the food or beverage is safe? Are you supporting your employees through any mental health challenges that they may have? There might be a lot of fear and anxiety in the space of having to show up and being at higher risk. So how are you supporting them through that? Are you offering any salary adjustments or bonus or overtime pay for those employees who are showing up and supporting you with getting that product out the door? And then finally, are you doing surveys of your employees as a check-in to see how they're feeling about everything, but also how you're doing in managing the employees? And then more importantly, reinforcing that they understand the processes, why the processes are in place, and the risks that are associated with those processes. John, over to you for question 2.
Okay, thank you, Cher. So question 2, simply put, do you have enough cash? Now we're about 8 weeks in, and we've seen already a phase of companies who haven't had enough cash. And as this carries on, we're going to see more and more companies who had 3 to 6 months of cash flow and who are going to start to struggle around this. So just some really quick questions, things that you want to be speaking about here. I know that you all have been looking very carefully at your cash flow. You've all been doing what you need to in the last 8 weeks to preserve cash. All of the government programs that are out today on a federal level are listed on the canada.ca COVID website. Go and have a look. They've done a great job of putting all those programs into one place. And perhaps with Kirsty's support, we can get that link out to all of you in the follow-up email today. You may need to look at temporary layoffs. You may also need to look at work share programs. Those are two things that can help support you, keeping your staff engaged in the business whilst giving you some flexibility as a business owner or in management to be able to manage downturns in demand or other changes that you may be seeing and pressures on your cash flow. I would imagine that all of you have all spoken to your suppliers and have spoken to your customers to see what you can do around improving terms. We've heard of a number of firms recently who are still hoping to get paid on normal terms from all their customers. That's a risky bet right now. And certainly if your cash flow depends on being paid in a timely fashion by all of your customers, I would say that is a risk that you need to be looking at and addressing. Have you spoken to your insurance company? Many companies have business interruption insurance, and that interruption insurance doesn't necessarily need to cover full interruption of the business. There are some policies that cover disease and pandemic as well. So make sure that you've spoken to your insurance company. And of course, if you don't have that in place, you might want to think about doing it for the future. So I'm not going to go here through all of the various different programs that are available at provincial levels and wherever you happen to be across the country. You'll see that there are provincial programs and there are federal programs. As I said, the canada.ca website is a good place to go for all that. But please make sure that you are doing the necessary to check out all of the programs. I know that there are some challenges right now in getting funds that are promised by the federal government through the various different channels, be those BDC or EDC or FCC. Money is taking a little bit longer to come through and has some strings attached to it, which doesn't necessarily make it easy, but keep pushing, folks. There is change happening on this almost on a daily basis. Back to you, Cher.
Our third question is, are you clear on your supply chain risk? So at this time, we understand and can appreciate that disruptions are inevitable. So this is really all about understanding which ones can you control and which ones can you manage. So we are seeing a lot of challenges with access to particular ingredients, or perhaps it's a label or a package. So asking yourself questions of, how vulnerable am I? Where is my source? What sort of risks are connected? If we look at foreign products, are you importing particular ingredients or products that you need? And what happens if that country decides to prioritize domestic supply? Are you at risk from not being able to access that product? And what are you doing to manage those risks? Do you have contingencies in place for price fluctuations if there is scarcity in the market? Are you in a position to switch to a different raw ingredient? Do you have multiple suppliers? And do you have plans in place for those significant disruptions or delays? And how can you go about managing those as well? And then question 4 is all around your essential skills and really taking a good hard look at your employees. Who are the essential ones, and are there particular aspects of their job that no one knows how to do except for them? And is there an opportunity for you to eliminate that? You want to make sure that there is as much cross-training as possible. I said at the top of the discussion, you want to have that cross-training. You want to be able to implement those training plans as quickly as possible to bring in new people should those essential roles suddenly be challenged. Perhaps an individual becomes ill from COVID and then they are in isolation, or maybe they're looking after a family member who is ill and they are then in isolation for 14 days. And sadly, we also need to be thinking about what happens if there is a death. In the US, we've already seen 13 deaths that are directly linked to working in a food processing or manufacturing site. So we need to be taking a good hard look at the essential workers and the role that they play in our operation. I'm going to pass it back to you now, John.
Fabulous. Thanks, Cher. So here's where I start to get really excited here, folks. We have an opportunity to create a new normal. What is going to be on the other side of this is going to be different from what the world looked like 8 weeks ago. We're all very clear on that. So what is your pivot? What is the space that you're moving into? Yeah, food service doesn't exist right now. That was maybe a big chunk of your market, and it's certainly a major chunk of many of the people that we talk to on a daily and weekly basis. All of those firms are in some form of pivot right now, and I'm sure you are too. Have you considered, as you're thinking about the pivot, how quickly you can access some of these new markets? What are these markets you're going after? Is it just a broad retail market, or are there specific niches that you can serve in that market? How quickly can you get to them? How powerfully can you leverage your infrastructure to be able to get to those markets? And then critically, when some of the disruption that we're seeing right now starts to attenuate, how quickly can you pivot back to continuing to work with your existing suppliers and markets and customers, and to continuing to be back in some of your more traditional markets as they come on board, and maybe as they come on in a different way to where they were 6, 8, 10 weeks ago in the past? So the power of your pivot has to be a key part of your strategy. And as you can guess from the title of today, we're going to be speaking about this quite a lot. But the two questions for now: how quickly can you access those new markets? What are those niches that you need to be looking at? How are you best leveraging your existing infrastructure to do that? And then the second one is, are these new markets and this pivot, is this going to stop you from going back to servicing your pre-existing markets and where you were prior to COVID? Back to you, Cher.
And then the next question is, are you clear on the impact of a closed door policy? So what sort of preventative measures are you putting in place to protect your employees and ultimately your customers? So for example, how reliant are you on external maintenance or service? And what are your measures that you're doing to protect them if they have to enter the facility, but also your employees from those external people entering? Some of the suggestions that we've heard of companies implementing are things like checking temperatures before they enter, sanitizing before and after, making sure that the individual sanitize as well as the equipment, but really just having a proper process in place to make sure that it's covered. And then thinking about what are the implications of moving to things like a virtual meeting. So those who are not expected to be in the actual operation, perhaps they are able to work from home. What are you doing in that regard? Have you looked at the software platforms? Are you ensuring that they are secure? Are you ensuring that you're not putting any sort of confidential information that you may not want in a platform such as that? So really looking at all of the potential risks. And then, while the risk is lower, the NSF International suggests that we should also be managing products and packaging that is entering the facility and monitoring how long before we enter them into the facility. So for example, the virus could live on cardboard for up to a day, stainless steel up to 2 days, and plastic up to 3 days. So do you have standard processes in place to manage things that are entering into the facility? And then if some of your employees are actually showing signs of COVID, do you have an isolation room where you can allow those employees to enter into that area and until they can get home? And do you have a process in place to connect with public health? And have you had public health come and look at your operation and prepare for this type of situation and help you assess what your risks are? Those are really important components. And then if that employee is showing signs, are they able to provide information about where they've been and who they've interacted with within the organization in the last 14 days so that they can help public health with preventing further outbreak? Over to you, John.
All right. What is your message of reassurance? Now, this is a time where your customers, your suppliers, and perhaps more importantly than anybody else, your staff, are looking to know that you've got this. They're looking to be reassured. They're looking for you to build confidence in your leadership, and they're looking for you to communicate, 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 and let them know what your plan is and how you're executing it, what's in your control and what's not in your control, how you're dealing with the things that are coming at you every day, so that they feel not necessarily that you have all the answers, but they feel that they can trust your leadership and that they have confidence that you're doing everything you can to move things forward. You might want to think about creating a safe space for employees, somewhere where they can come maybe before they go on the line and they can just share whatever they need to share. Just say whatever they need to say. Maybe they've got a loved one who's sick. Maybe they're caring for an elderly relative. Maybe they've got somebody in a long-term care home who they're really worried about. Give them a space that's safe to be able to start to talk about what they are experiencing outside of your workspace, so that they can feel like work is a place that they're not just coming to be part of the solution in creating enough food to go on the shelves, but they actually feel like you've really got their back. And the other thing that you might want to think about is how you communicate out this message of reassurance when what people are looking for right now is to know and to have confidence in the transparency, in the traceability, in the localness of solutions. So how can you be a local community player, and how can you, however large or small you happen to be as a company, how can you be delivering value and showing that you're delivering value to your community? So those are the 7 key pieces, and we're really going to assume that sort of 6 to 8 weeks in, if you're not already on top of or in action on all of those 7, then you should be. But those are the baseline. That's like phase 1 of this journey. So now let's start to move into phase 2 and look at the power of this pivot. So when business continuity isn't going to be enough, when just doing what you're doing, keeping the doors open isn't enough, when you've lost 20%, 30%, 50% of your bottom line, where do you need to go to pivot your business so that you can start to capture some of those markets? And how do you leverage your knowledge base to uncover some new solutions? Cher.
So there's a lot of really important differences between how large companies and how small companies are responding to resiliency. So this is a really critical differentiation. Right now, what we're seeing with the large companies is they have a lot of standard operating procedures. They have processes, they have strategies in place and plans in place that they can simply activate based on what's happening. Is it perfect? No, of course not. And they're having to do their own pivot within their plans. But the point being that they have a plan. And most of these companies have a strong purpose. They have strong connections into the community, into the environment and the impacts on their environment. And so they are able to leverage that purpose to make decisions. That's why we're seeing companies like Loblaw and Metro and Sobeys and Maple Leaf Foods, investing in their people, raising their salaries, making significant investments and contributions to food banks, because they know that when they support the community, that the community will then in turn support them. But the small to medium company is a little different. They don't have that vast network within their teams to build these comprehensive strategies for all the different scenarios, nor should they have to. They just don't have that kind of capacity. And with 95 to 97% of our industry classified as small to medium, what is it that we can do to support them? And this is really where we want to take this discussion now. We want to support, how do we support those small to medium companies? Back to you, John.
Thank you, Cher. Now, Cher talked earlier about that Harvard Business Review study. This was a fascinating piece of research. What they did was they looked at downturns in the 80s, the 90s, and then in the noughties. 3 downturns and mapped company performance, and Cher gave you those stats earlier. What we're interested in is not the 20% that went bankrupt or the 70% that stayed alive but struggled and eventually got back where they were 3 years later. We're interested in the 9% that actually came out of these downturns stronger and thriving. And what we have learned from this work and what we are now applying in the work that we're doing every day with food and beverage companies across Canada and beyond is that you need to have a multi-pronged strategy that really has 2 big pieces to it. All companies, when you go into a downturn, will look to cut costs. If you want to separate out the 9%, what they did was that they cut costs through operational efficiencies. They took the opportunity, rather than slashing and burning staff, which is what most other companies do. And it tends to be where we look first, because employee labor is typically the largest issue and largest line on the capex, on the opex of most organizations. So that's where you look to make your cuts first. But these organizations that thrived, they didn't go and slash labor. Quite on the contrary, they tried to retain as much of that labor as possible. Where they made their cuts was on the operational efficiencies. They leveraged their people to reinvent their processes. And they looked for sustainability as a way to drive that. So that's the first thing that they did. The second thing was that they continued to leverage their labor to go out and seek new opportunities, new markets, new places where they could bring their products that wouldn't have been possible prior to the downturn. And they started to make headways into those markets, such that when things picked up again, they were able to ride that wave and grow significantly. So the first thing that we need to know is that if we are interested in becoming one of those 9% of companies that actually thrive in this space, we have to look at cutting costs through operational efficiencies, using the power of sustainability, looking at waste, which we'll come back to a little bit later in this webinar, engaging employees for new ideas, cutting costs and working smarter, and focusing on trying to access new markets. But which new markets, you're going to say? Okay, great, I could go in a million different directions. Well, the thing is, you've got to be clear on something we call currency. What is your currency? Now, what do I mean by that? Your currency is your knowledge base. Now, you as a company know what you do. You know your products. You know how, for some of you as well, how you make those products. What you're probably not clear on is the knowledge base, all of the things that you know how to do, that you need to apply, that knowledge that you apply to be able to create your products. Your currency is about getting clear on that knowledge base and seeing how it can be applied into new ways, into new spaces. Yeah. If you're a beverage company, you may think that your expertise, your product, is a particular beverage, but your knowledge base may include how to process. It may include how to build manufacturing chains. It may include a whole bunch of things that could even be in the service and the knowledge transfer space, not just products. That could be your currency. So understanding your currency gives you a space to know, where can we go? It's not just about where can we sell our product, but what can we do? What do we know how to do as a company? And how can we leverage that, not just in the product space, but also in the service and or the knowledge transfer arenas as well. Now, so the first thing you want to do is you want to get clear on your currency to help you understand which pivots are going to be helpful. But then you need to align it with something else. Knowing your currency is great, but which potential pivots are the ones that are going to serve you best? Yeah, of all the ones that your currency allows you to do, which are the ones that are going to serve you best? The truth is, if you don't know why your company exists beyond profit, you're going to struggle to know which pivots serve that purpose and which don't. Your purpose, another way of talking about your purpose, is the why of your company. Yeah, we know what you do and we know how you do it. We've now talked about needing a knowledge base and getting your currency. That's awesome. But you need to know why you do it. Why do you do what you do? Understanding the why of your business and combining that with your currency. The most effective way to mitigate the risks associated with pivoting, because there are risks, is to be clear on what you stand for and to use that as a set of criteria to say which of these pivots best serve my purpose. Because, Cher, purpose plus currency equals the power of a pivot, does it not?
Absolutely. And I want to share with you two examples of companies that we've worked with that have taken their currency, leveraged their purpose, and really pivoted. The first example is Ice River Springs. They're a bottled water company, and they are actually a completely closed loop company. They recycle all of their plastics, they pelletize them, blow them, create their own bottles. And so what they looked at was their currency was that innovative manufacturing. Their purpose is redefining bottled water. And they took that currency and that purpose and they pivoted to be able to very quickly manufacture sanitizer, put it in their bottled water, and get it out to the market when there was clearly a shortage in supplies on the sanitation side. My second example is Real Food for Real Kids. They produce real meals and healthy snacks for children in schools and daycares in the Greater Toronto area. And so you can imagine that when COVID hit and all of the schools and daycares were shut, their business was instantly shuttered. All that remained was a few daycares that were servicing the emergency services employees. So they had to pivot very quickly. And their purpose is all about enabling and inspiring healthy eating. And so they were able to take that purpose and say, you know what, we have a really strong currency of logistics in the Greater Toronto area, and we can service those families that are now at home, and we can provide them with real healthy meals. And so they pivoted to a direct to customer model, and they're now providing meals, complete meal kits and snacks directly to the local community. So some great opportunities. The next phase that we want to touch on is the part around operational efficiency. So when we looked at the 9% of those companies, they put a strong emphasis on operational efficiency. And so for me, this is a tricky one right now with COVID, because so many companies are just focused on get the product out the door. You know what, efficiency, set it aside, focus on getting the product out the door. That's what's critical. We've got to get the shelves stocked. But when we pause and we think about this, there's some challenges with that approach. John, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Cher. So without going into this too much detail, because I think everybody on this call is aware of what's happened, we've seen really a sort of divide. COVID has split food and bev into two big chunks. We've got companies who have seen a huge chunk fall off their bottom line, and we've seen companies who are really just under a huge amount of pressure to keep the lines going and to accelerate production and where demand is increasing. And those companies there are juggling the challenges of how to do that when you're managing the protocols associated with keeping people safe. So that is the divide that we're seeing, and that's created some significant pressures, as we all know, on the supply chain. Companies who are required to increase their production have been doing that by increasing shifts, moving to sort of 7-day, 24-hour operations, reducing SKUs, and that was one example. Was Ital Pasta was a company that was referenced in the Globe and Mail article on this. You can see that this is creating a lot of interest across the country, where they normally produce 60 SKUs of pasta, and they're now down to 6 to improve productivity. So Kraft Heinz, for example, has been in the media recently about how they're breaking output records and increasing productivity. But to Cher's point, if we're not thinking about sustainability as part of this, there really is a piece that's missing, isn't that right, Cher?
Absolutely. It's interesting because when the focused conversation is on get the product out the door, what we lose is that opportunity to say, are we producing the product in the most efficient way possible? And this is really where I love to bring that conversation in around food loss and waste. When we've been talking to various companies, we've been asking them, are you paying attention to food loss and waste even in the times of COVID? And we're not really hearing a lot of that discussion. And so I want to sort of flip that conversation on its side. What if we could prevent food loss and waste from happening and actually increase our capacity and our supply because we weren't creating that waste in the first place? What's really interesting is that oftentimes when I have a conversation with a company, they'll say, you know what, we don't have food waste in our plant. It's all very well managed. It is diverted away from landfill, and we are sending it either to a composter, a biodigester, or animal feed. And what I'll ask them is, well, why are you diverting? And if there's any form of edible product in that diversion, then there's probably an opportunity to prevent food waste, which means there's probably an opportunity to increase your capacity and ultimately the supply to get products on the shelf. And there's a tremendous opportunity here. I want to share with you a couple of examples of clients that we worked with. Doug Dipburner, who is the chief engineer at Molson Coors, he says that they are always paying attention to the product that is not going into the bottle or the can, because in a beverage facility, it's really easy for it to slip down the drain and not be noticed. And then another really important perspective is one that looks at, is from Eden Valley Poultry. And he talked, this was, I apologize, I've skipped ahead. I want to advance the next slide here. So what happens when we focus in on operational efficiency instead of, when we focus in on food loss and waste instead of product out the door? I want to share with you now some examples of 50 companies that we worked with over the last year. This was in partnership with the Walmart Foundation and EnviroStewards and the Canadian Centre for Food Integrity. And what we set out to do was understand what's the potential impact of wasted food in these 50 companies. And what was the potential to reduce environmental impact, increase capacity, increase product output, and also reduce the costs. Interestingly, across those 50 companies, we identified 9.3 million kilograms per year across those 50 companies. And when we break that down, that was 15 million meals. And while we recognize that not all of those products could be classified as a meal, when we look at just the calories, that was over 11 million calories. Think of the amount of products we could put on the shelf. And embedded in all of that waste was 32,000 tons of CO2 on an annual basis. And if that doesn't get your attention at an individual facility level, we found over $228,000 per site per year with a payback of less than a year. I want to give you a couple of examples. So Bonduelle, they do fresh vegetable processing. We found for them 265,000 kilograms per year of fresh produce that we could put back into the market. It was valued at over $560,000 to their business per year. At Bose Brewing, we found 3 opportunities that could increase their yield by over 450,000 liters per year. That was enough increase in yield that they could grow for an entire year without any capital investment. And it saved over $730,000 to the business. And Eden Valley Poultry, this is the example I was starting earlier. They could increase their yield by 74,000 kilograms per year. And that was worth over $436,000 to them. And Dean Gurney, when we touched base with him, he actually commented, had they not implemented all of those opportunities, they actually would be really challenged right now to meet the increased customer demand that is being asked of them in their poultry processing. John, over to you.
Thank you, Cher. This is the bit that nobody really ever wants to talk about. Yeah, food waste is, I mean, to Cher's point, when we talk to companies, the first thing we hear is there isn't any. And the data that Cher's just shown you is from 1% of the manufacturing industry in this country. That's 15 million meals. We have a responsibility, ladies and gents, at this time when people are struggling to make ends meet like they have never struggled to make ends meet before, when food banks are seeing unprecedented levels of demand. We have a responsibility collectively to make sure that those 15 million meals, and again, that's 1% of 1% of the industry just here in Canada, are getting to the people that need it and not falling on the floor, falling off the line and going down the drain. So how can we do that in a way that is meaningful and is quick and easy? And we know that everybody's got different priorities right now and everybody's focused on just keeping the train running. How can you do this thing that's sort of sustainability and it's not in my wheelhouse right now and I have to focus on things, but at the same time, we can't let those 15 million meals go down the drain or fall off the line. So here are 3 things that we've been working on here at Provision with our partners in our network to help you make a difference on these issues. The first one is remote food waste prevention assessments. We actually developed a new system of remote food waste prevention assessments where as long as you have a smartphone and you can take a video of your line and you've got 15 minutes, we can help you identify the low-hanging fruit of where your biggest opportunities are in terms of making a difference on waste. So we can help you with the remote food waste assessments. The second one is to talk to your people. We talked earlier about how you're working with your people at the moment, but how are you leveraging their ideas? Are you creating opportunities not just to put like a suggestion box at the end of the line, but are you engaging them creatively? One idea that we've seen some people doing is to ask their staff on the way to work and on the way back from work to just grab their phones and record a little voice message, a little audio message saying, here's what I'm seeing and here's what I think we could do, that even can be sent anonymously if that's better. So think about creative ways that you can leverage the ideas of your staff. And the final point, and this might sound ridiculously daft, but walk the floor. It's amazing what you can uncover by simply walking the floor during and at the end of a production run with a lens of waste prevention. Cher.
So the fourth phase is understanding what's at stake. As John just talked about, resiliency is on the line. When we think about food loss and waste prevention, waste is part of our resiliency. And right now, we know that 80% of our time is really focused in on just dealing with the challenges that COVID presents. But the remaining 20% really needs to focus in now on the planning for the future, planning that pivot, planning how we're going to prevent and reduce the waste that's in our operations. Imagine if we could just capture 1 or 2% per company and increase the amount of product that's going on the shelf, but also the amount of waste that's happening in this system. Really, resiliency is on the line here. We know that resiliency for the individual companies, for our food system, we need to be looking at this when we're doing that 20% planning for our future. And ultimately, we don't want to let our products fall off the line or go down the drain. John, over to you.
So forgive me a moment of analogy here. Last week was the 50th anniversary of Apollo 13. Remember that mission to the moon that didn't go quite so well, with Tom Hanks in the starring role as the movie. Apollo 13 was men going out on an adventure and then having to come back after losing oxygen and losing power about 200,000 miles away from Earth. And if you look at it, there's a really interesting parallel, because of course there's this explosion up in space, and at that point there's about an hour of absolute chaos where there's pieces of information coming in left, right, and center, and mission control and the astronauts are trying to figure out what's going on. And they do that. They figure out what the problem is. Kind of like over the last 6 to 8 weeks, you've been figuring out what the problem is. But then they're 200,000 miles away from Earth, pointing the wrong direction, and they have to figure out how to get home. And that's the long, painful, cold, miserable bit. That's where we're going next. We've figured out where the problem is. We are, as we like to say, at the end of the beginning. What's going to happen over the next few months? Well, neither Cher nor I have crystal balls, and frankly, if anybody tells you that they do have one right now, you should walk away from them, because they're talking rubbish. Nobody knows what the next few months are going to look like, or the next few years are going to look like. But if you look at what's being talked about and the economists that we're reading, the IMF is predicting the largest economic contraction since 1921. We're facing a double hit here in Canada because of the oil prices as well as COVID. We've already lost 800,000 food service industry jobs in Canada, and there is the latest data is that about 10% of those food service jobs will never come back. About 10% of restaurants will never reopen. So we are in this space where we are likely to see an unprecedented depression of some form over the next little while, and this is where we have to knuckle down. This is where we have to prepare ourselves for the cold, dark, miserable journey through what comes next. Cher, on that note.
Yes. And sometimes when we're in survival mode, things like the planet can feel like a nice to have, I know that conversations that I was having 6 and 8 weeks ago about the urgency around single-use plastics and climate and food waste and responsible sourcing, and the urgency around meeting these targets for the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals have really almost been pushed to the side. And that can be challenging when you really want to focus on those things, but you're in survival mode. And I think Bill Gates said it best when he said, until we get out of the crisis, COVID will continue to dominate our attention. And things like climate work, and I would add plastics, food waste, responsible sourcing, will get pushed to the side. But there are some incredible things that are happening right now. What we're seeing from an innovation and from a science perspective, and the way that the world is coming together around collaboration and focusing really in on the problem. There's a lot that we're learning right now. And I think as we come out of COVID, we can take that same sense of collaboration, science, innovation, and sense of urgency to focus in on the climate side and on the environmental issues that we're seeing as we really truly understand what's happening with COVID. What we are also understanding now is that human side of climate and of pandemics, that when we have extreme problems that we have to face, people come together. And we're also understanding that traditionally, when we've talked about the urgency of climate, we've talked about it from the economy and we've talked about it from the impact on the environment. We haven't talked about it from the sense of this is the potential impact to humans. And now that we're seeing that correlation between the pandemic and the human side and the links to deforestation and the bats and those links to climate, I think it'll be a much easier story to bring together. Back to you, John.
So I'm going to go back to that lonely, cold spacecraft moment. Because if they'd lost those three guys up in the stars, then it would have been 3 people who had died. But there was a lot more at stake than just 3 lives. There was a lot more at stake with that project than just bringing back 3 astronauts. There was the pride of an entire nation. Plus, I mean, NASA was what, 400,000 people at that point who'd all worked on this. The question here is, they had a huge amount at stake to bring back those astronauts. What do you have at stake? What do you have at stake here? What's the purpose and the meaning of your business? And to push the analogy perhaps just a little bit too far, what would happen if you didn't make it? What would be the impact? Not just on your employees, but what would be the impact on the broader planet? What would be the impact on the broader world? What would be the impact on your community if your business didn't make it? And if you can't answer that question, then that's really where you've got to start. Because the only thing that's going to give you the motivation to get through the dark, miserable days of the next however many months or years that are coming at us is to know that we're fighting for something that's bigger than ourselves here, that we're playing at a higher level than just profit. That's not going to keep you going. It's not going to provide you with the energy and the drive that you're going to need to keep creating and keep motivating and keep inspiring your teams and keep building a successful business. It needs to be about something more than that. So what comes next and what's at stake are intricately linked. What do you stand for? And what is the cause that you want to fight for over the next few months and years? Because you're going to have to fight for it. Cher.
I want to share with you a couple of examples of companies that have really figured out how to minimize that turbulence as they've gone through this journey. This has been a really tough time, and it's not because they have better balance sheets or they're better organized. It's because they have more to fight for. So one of my examples is from Fresh City Farms, and it's Ron Gould, and he is the founder. And when we chatted with him, he reminded us the importance of his purpose, which is better life through food. And he talked about how he really used that purpose to define how he was going to pivot within the business, but also how he was going to treat his employees and what he owed his customers as he was managing the impacts of the pandemic. I want to share one more example from Christine Hayes, who's the president of Shaw's Ice Cream. Their purpose is bringing families and communities together to share a moment. And when we chatted with her, she said, you know what, this is so critical to her business, the purpose that they've defined at a time when community and people cannot come together. They can really focus in on how do they continue to support those people and communities through their product. And then my last example is John Pidgeot, who's the president and CEO of Club Coffee, and their purpose is growing the good in coffee. And when we talked to John, he talked about how critical it was that he take care of his people, and that his people were his #1 priority, making sure that they were okay and that they were looked after. And that was really how he was growing the good in coffee. As we move into the final phase and begin to wrap up our webinar, I want to focus in now on writing the future in circles. We know that our food system is broken today. We are in a linear model, which take, make, dispose. We've attempted to do some things around recycling, but really there is inherent waste up and down our supply chains. We really need to move into this concept of circular, regenerative, an economy in which there is no waste in our system, that we design and mimic that of Earth. When we think about nature, nature doesn't have any waste. Everything has a purpose. And so really that's where we need to move to as we think about where to from here. Coronavirus has given us this incredible pause in time. There's this time of saying, you know what, the economy has stopped. What seemed impossible in the past because we couldn't possibly disrupt the economy has happened with coronavirus. So I see this as a tremendous opportunity to say, let's rebuild our economy. Let's rebuild our food system in a way in which is circular, because we have this opportunity to pause. Let's take the learning from this pandemic to prepare ourselves for the future, because I think Corona is just the beginning of what will be if we don't. And finally, I want to invite you to tomorrow afternoon between 2 and 4:30. If you're interested in learning more about the circular economy and what it can do for your business in building your resiliency, we are offering a complimentary workshop. And I believe the link to registration in that workshop is in the chat line. And so now, without further ado, I'd like to open it up and pass it back to Christy for any questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Cher and Jon, for your very informative presentation. I do have a couple of questions from the audience. The first being, are either one of you able to expand on some of the examples of the companies that you spoke about on decreasing waste and becoming more efficient? Like, can you speak to any processes that had to be changed? Was it formulation related, labor, equipment, that type of thing?
A great question. You know what, every site that we visit is unique in its own way, but typically there are a number of ways that we will look for opportunities. We'll look at your standard operating procedures. We'll look at what is falling off the line in terms of equipment. We will look at training, so how we can train people to see the waste that's happening. So it really depends on the site. And we have a wonderful team of engineers in the Partner Enviro Stewards, and they go in and they look at and they talk to the employees. Where do you see waste happening? We evaluate the waste, and then we put it into our food loss and waste toolkit, and we calculate it. That toolkit is available on our website. It's free to use, and it will look at the true impact in terms of dollars, environmental impact, and social impact. So pretty big loaded question. There's no one answer. It is often very customized, but we see common themes around standard operating procedures, training, and equipment. Did you have anything to add, Jon?
Yeah, I would add to that often it's an engineering problem, and often it's an engineering and people problem. And the pieces that Cher's just talked about help provide the engineering pieces to this. But if the staff, if the employees who are on the line, if the employees in the management are not enrolled in reducing this waste because they feel aligned to the purpose of the company, then there's a missing piece here that cannot be filled by just engineering solutions. So it really has to be a combination of getting a clear purpose of what the company stands for, so you can say to your staff, listen, every time this falls off the line, this goes against what we stand for as a company. This is against why we're here and what we fight for. And enrolling those people into a change management process where they can be really empowered to feel like they are making a difference to this thing that's bigger than all of us, that we can't achieve on our own. And then the engineering solutions can dovetail with that to produce this really powerful effect.
And John, you're bang on. You can have the best technology, you can have the best engineering solutions, but until the people are engaged and enrolled, it will fail. It is 100% connected back to the people, their behavior, and their acceptance and enrollment of those new opportunities that we present.
Thank you very much. We have time for one last question. You mentioned defining a company's currency towards the beginning of the presentation today and asking the question why, or what is the company's purpose? It's easier said than done. If it's a small to medium-sized company, how do you do this, or how do you get a clearer picture on this? Do you involve some of your staff members, your clients? Do you do this by doing a survey? Like, how do you start? Where to go?
I'm going to let you answer, John, and then I'll come in the back end and top up whatever you do, since you did the currency section.
Yeah, no worries. So that's an awesome question, and I love that. So thank you, whoever asked that. How do you get clear on your purpose? You're right. You're a small to medium-sized company. You're flat out doing the things that you need to do to get the product out the door. Well, one of the things that we like to do is we like to sit down with the leadership teams, and we like to have a broad conversation about what really fires them up. Why do they come into work every day? You know, we talk often about the why of the company as sort of, why do you do what you do, and why should anybody care? And we help just sort of pull out the threads of what is important, what are the strengths of the company, and what are the underlying things that really fire up the leadership team. And often what we'll find is that there's an unarticulated thing that everybody kind of knows and takes for granted as kind of being as part of the culture or the DNA of the organization. But until you articulate it, it doesn't really have any power. Then what we do is we'll also go and talk to the folks on the front line, the people on the line. We'll talk to some of your customers as well, and we'll ask them the same question. What does this company stand for? What is it like to work here? What is it like to purchase from this company? What's it like to be in relationship with them? And we'll have those conversations, and we'll pull all of those threads together, and then out of that we'll create a purpose which everybody can get excited about and align with. And it really comes from, we see ourselves in that process as really just a bit of a mirror shining what is already there, but perhaps is a little bit difficult to articulate. Cher, what would you add to that?
And then building on sort of that concept, when you have that statement that everybody can align to, then you can say, okay, what are our strategic priorities? What are our goals? How do we monitor, measure, and track it and set our key performance indicators? And now you have something that you can align the entire business to. And so as we talked about, when you're making decisions about where do you pivot, what markets do you go into, you can connect it back to your purpose, your why. And then the decisions become a lot easier to make. When you embed all elements of sustainability, the environmental impact, the social impact, and the economic impact of your business decision making, the purpose becomes your foundation. It gives you your guardrails of where you need to be and how you want to pivot.
And then just to speak to this piece around your knowledge base and your currency, well, your currency is a combination of what you know how to do and where the world is going. And it's that combination of aligning, where are our skill sets? What do we really know how to do? And then over here, what are the trends? Where are things going? And the ability to then connect those through the lens of purpose. That's how you can start to bring that jigsaw puzzle together. Thank you for that question. Awesome.
Fantastic, thank you. Okay, one last quick question that came in. viewer wants to know, wanted to ask if you have an example of a food company or a food company cross-training. So when perhaps some departments are under capacity and others are over capacity.
So we actually worked with Marzan Foods, and we did a case study on them where part of what we were doing was exactly that. Our focus was, how do we identify the essential roles across the organization, and how do we do the cross training so that we could reduce the amount of risk if we had to move people around or people weren't around. And this was actually several years ago. This was all part of their sort of risk management planning, was to say, all right, we have too many risks of people that if they leave the organization, no one else knows how to do that job. And so it's about really taking the time to say, who are the essential roles and responsibilities, and can you cross-train to step in under circumstances that require it, and building that cross-training program so that you can do it. John, did you have anything to add?
No, I think that's great, Cher. Thank you.
Well, thank you. On behalf of CIFST and Food in Canada, thank you both, Cher and John, for your great presentation today. And a reminder for attendees that if you have any additional questions, both Cher and John's contacts are listed on the last slide here. And I would just like to remind everyone that CIFST and Food in Canada are hosting webinars every Wednesday, likely into June and beyond. And we have great speakers lined up for May. May 6th is Dr. Sylvain Charlebois. May 13th is Dana McCauley. May 20th is Lawrence Goodridge, and they are both with the University of Guelph. And on May 27th, we have Deanna Zenger with the Food Processing Skills Council. And I'd just like to thank everyone for attending today, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye now.